It's not a
Okay, welcome to Queer Politics webinar number 28. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to remind you of our format and structure, we will take around about 30 minutes for our presentation today, which I shall introduce in a second. And then the second half of the hour will be devoted to questions to comments. If you have a question or a comment and you would like to be on the list to ask Jayaprakash a question, then please send me a little chat message and say you would like to be on the question list. You do need to not to send me the question itself. I just need to know who wants to be on the list to ask questions. Do that anytime in the first half of the session. Another little reminder, if you are willing and able, it would be lovely to put your webcam on. It's always nice for the presenter to see an audience of responsive faces. Obviously, if you can't do that, that's absolutely fine. But if you have the capacity and the willingness to put your webcam on, we would love to see you. I did want to update you before I introduce today's presenter on the rest of the season, the spring season of the webinar. We've been filling out our remaining spots, and I'm very excited to let you know that on April 1st, next week, we have Jamie Hagan from Queen's University in Belfast, who will be talking about international relations, international security, queering, women, peace, and security. I myself, for my sins, will be off to a family wedding in Florida. So I'm not sure if I'll ever return from that, but we shall see. But in my absence, Gabrielle Magni has graciously taken the chair and will chair that meeting next week. The week after that, Pippa Cattrall is going to be talking to us about queer spaces and a project she's working on architecture and how it intersects with the queer community and society. The week after that, on April 15th, we have Rasa Kamauskait, who is going to be talking to us about the strategy of the queer movement in Lithuania. The week after that, we actually have a roundtable of bisexual and pansexual parliamentarians. Well, I think we have 50% of the global quota of bisexual and pansexual women in Parliament. We have former Representative Katie Hill from the California 25th, Chloe Swarbrick, the Auckland MP from New Zealand, Nadia Whitome, the Labour MP from Nottingham East in the United Kingdom, Senator Annie Hui from Ireland, State Senator Sarah McBride from Delaware, and Layla Moran, the Member of Parliament from Oxford West and Abingdon in the United Kingdom. And they will be talking about the experience of being a pansexual identified parliamentarian. And then the week after that, we have a roundtable, which we've just put together, which is going to study and think about the role of LGBTQ scholars and the role of LGBTQ scholarship in political science, but also sociology and other related fields. We have a fabulous panel who will kick off that discussion. Phil Ayoub, Zain Marib, Dara Strolovich, Ravi Perry, Paisley Kara, and Christopher Velasco are all going to be speaking to that question about being LGBTQ or studying LGBTQ issues in the academy. And then finally, the last session for the spring will be on May 6th, and we have Ahmed Muzahzim, who will be talking about Islamophobia and homophobia around his study of queer Afghan Muslims living in the United States. So we have a pretty broad and diverse and I think fabulous raft of sessions to close out the spring. But today we have Jayaprakash Mishra, who has a PhD in cultural studies and anthropology from the Department of Liberal Arts at the Indian Institute of Technology in Hyderabad. Now, Jayaprakash studies the phenomenon of gay men in India married to women and the ways that they negotiate those social interactions and the institutions of marriage and family. He did extensive ethnographic research of these subjects in the eastern Indian state of Odisha. And his work writ large is at the intersections of queer kinship, of non-Western conceptions of family and marriage, and of the intersections of emotions, and also of digital relationships and societies that are forming online today. So we are very excited to welcome Jayaprakash with us today, who's going to talk to us about this fascinating topic of being queer in India. And I believe he has a slideshow to share. So I shall let Jayaprakash take it away and send me a note if you'd like to be on the question list. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, for this very generous introduction. Hi, everyone. So I'll take a moment and share my screen. So, okay. How do I locate my? No. Just. Um, I'm so sorry. I cannot locate my desktop. It's taking a moment. Um,
Would it be easier for you to quickly email the slides to me and I can share them on my screen, Jay?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'm doing it right now. Yep.
Sure. Maybe if you want to start talking a tiny bit about the subject, and I'll get those.
Yeah, I just share my screen. Sorry, I just shared my presentation to you. I just emailed you.
Perfect. I shall put it up as soon as I get it.
Sure, sure. So hi everyone. Thank you, Dr. Renaud, for this very generous introduction. I'm extremely delighted to be here, and I should be. Yeah. Yeah. So it's been a very incredibly interesting seminar series so far. I found some of our earlier conversation very generative and extremely important, particularly Ibtisam Ahmad's presentations here a few weeks ago on queer politics and utopia in Bangladesh has sort of laid the ground for my talk today, because of our shared colonial history and also the existence of draconian colonial anti-sodomy law, which was read down only a few years ago on 6th of September 2018. But other than that, the socio-cultural demography, lived experiences, and also situated practices bind these shared experiences and queer politics together. On that note, the title of my talk today is Negotiating Marriage, Family, and Intimacy, an ethnographic study of non-normative sexualities in Odisha, India. So for this talk today, I majorly draw on my doctoral research and also on the ethnography that I've conducted in the Eastern Indian state of Odisha. What I plan to do for this presentation today is to sort of take you through some of the key concepts, theories, and some of the interesting findings. Okay, the central idea of this thesis is to examine how unmarried gay men and gay men married to women negotiate with the social institution of marriage and family and their same-sex intimacy, drawing on these ethnographic accounts. This study is situated in a socio-political climate marked primarily by, oh, here we are. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is the central idea of the presentation today. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm basically talking about the background and motivation of the research, where this study is situated in a socio-political climate marked primarily by two events. First, on 11th December 2013, the Supreme Court of India, which is the apex court, overturned the Delhi High Court's judgment against Section 377 of IPC, thereby recriminalized same-sex activity. Second, the political party that has been advocating that homosexuality is against Indian culture and is imported from the West took to power at the center. And because of these two events, the expectation of Section 377 of Indian Penal Code being read down through a parliamentary process kind of ceased. This study started in a socio-political climate charged with hopelessness. However, such hopelessness also led to a positive outcome. The resistance against the heteronormative forces became more systematic, organized, and also structured. Non-government organizations, lawyers collective, the queer community, and also allies congregated, and NAS Foundation filed a curative petition against the Supreme Court's judgment. So such responses from the Indian civil society provided further impetus to media coverage, discussions, and also uh, uh, sort of numerous queer pride parade events that brought visibility to the community. Sorry. My brief stint at queer academic and activist circles in the southern Indian state of uh, Hyderabad and Bangalore, Telangana, and Karnataka by 2015 offered me an insight into the despair, anger, and some hope among the queer people from the queer community. The discussions around queer scholarship focused on primarily anti-sodomy law, state oppression, and social stigma. Though such mobilization played a very crucial role in the fight against criminalization of homosexuality in the legal discourse, but such events, meetings, and discussions are organized and attended primarily by educated, elite, English-speaking, city-bred queer people who are mostly out in the public or were quasi-closeted. Such exclusions have been discussed by Anuruddha Datta as metronormative, queer discourse that centered on urban lives and experiences. Although these groups managed to attract interest of a specific section of people, the absence of common gay men was quite noticeable, implying that most of these spaces systematically sort of ruled out the existence of gay men who may not eventually want to become activists, may not think of closet as necessarily regressive, or may not look for chosen family. Of course, I'm referring to Kath Weston here, Kath Weston's work here. These are people whose stories may not necessarily conform to the standard transnational or global template of coming out to parents or natal family, looking for a queer community, and seeking a partner. Such realization also encouraged me to explore the experiences of gay men from the semi-urban and rural pockets of India. Having said that, a few words of caution here. There is a danger of falling into that dichotomy of rural and urban queer experiences, which might very well sort of intersect, converge, and also commonly shared. So what I'm not trying to argue here is that the rural experience as more authentic or urban as less Indian or less local or less indigenous. Next slide, please. So the word non-normative sexualities that I use in my research, in this research, counters the fixity and definity of sexualities and suggests a more nuanced framework other than heterosexual, homosexual, binary. The word gay man in this project broadly encompasses cis men who desire and engage with other men sexually, emotionally, and also in many other ambivalent ways. Though words like non-heterosexual man, male-to-male sexual subjects have been used in this research, the word gay man captures the subjectivity position of these men who use the word gay not as an identity marker, rather to refer to their same-sex desire and behavior. Most of the men in the semi-urban locations of Odisha do not discuss their lived experiences in terms of their belongingness to a closely knitted community, as we understand in the queer discourse. They mostly do not engage in discussions of their experiences through a legal framework and deliberately avoid it by trivializing the laws and state interventions in interesting ways. Discussions on their same-sex intimate experiences majorly focuses on family, marriage, and multiple modes of intimate engagement with other men. Even though small towns are not clearly defined in terms of area, population, and other demographic markers in the census of India 2011, small towns are subliminal spaces. These are spaces that primarily thrive on trade and commerce. The small towns of Odisha, like Bargarh, Balangir, Sambalpur, Barampur, Jajpur, these are like some of the names of the places where I did my fieldwork, are mostly semi-urban spaces that have some of the mutual markers of rural and urban. The infrastructure like educational institutions, health services, and also entertainment facilities make these spaces inhabitable. But at the same time, small towns are also spaces where some people live in the fringes of the society. So, for example, caste hierarchy is undeniably present in the social fabrics of small towns. Beyond the sort of rural urban experiences, a city is also believed not only to offer the spaces which are most inclusive, uh, more inclusive and more liberatory. It also provided anonymity to gay men, enabling them to explore their sexuality uninhibitedly. But uh, there's a particular ambivalence towards city and semi-urban locations. So on the contrary, some of the gay men also believe that small towns offers a sense of belongingness to them, which the city fails to provide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Some of the objectives of the research is like how gay men in small town conceive and articulate their same-sex desire and behavior, which may not constitute which may not be constitutive of their identity, and how unmarried gay men negotiate with the heteronormative expectation on the one hand, but homoromantic desire, same-sex intimacy on the other hand. How gay men married to women situate themselves in position of ambivalence by forging intimate relations with other men without annulling their mixed orientation marriage. Uh, I'm going to particularly sorry I'm going to particularly focus on the third objective for today's presentation, but I'll briefly talk about the other two as well. So next slide. um, so this study draws on 32 ethnographic accounts of gay men from rural and semi-urban pockets of Odisha, undertaken in two phases. The first phase of the field study was done from May to July 2015. The second phase was undertaken in October 2018. The participants were initially connected online, but majority of them were recruited through snowball sampling for the face-to-face interviews later. Apart from conducting 2 rounds of in-depth interviews, their personal stories have been followed regularly on emails and phones, seeking updates at their personal front. I also discuss how my how my entry, exit, and also several revisits to the field sites have enriched and impacted the ethnographic data in the study over these years. Next slide, please. So this is a map of India where you can see towards the eastern coastal belt. You can see the sea there, and the area marked in yellow is the field site that I'm talking about in this research. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, these are some of the snapshots of places I visited. So these are like, some of the snapshots of uh, like railway stations and bus stations and few other spaces that I visited. So these are like small towns. Next slide. Yeah, so this is, for this I did a little bit of even extensive literature review, and very quickly, some of the important points are like the discussion around scholarship on non-normative gendered and sexual subjectivity in India has significantly responded to some of the major political movements in the country. These are some of the important movements that were not only catalytic in the activism but also generated much scholarship around it. The literature built around movements like the release of the movie Fire and the legal process like decriminalization and recriminalization of homosexuality also occupied much of the space in queer scholarship, that subjects like queer relationalities or non-normative kinship in Indian geopolitical locations were largely understudied, and it invites some sort of sociological and anthropological investigation. Yeah. So before we move on to discuss specific sections on gay man married to women and their navigation of marriage, family, and so on, let me very quickly summarize some of the other interesting findings for you. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So here I show how gay men in small towns of India do not seek discrete sexual identity, unambiguous approval from the family, or recognition from the judiciary or the state. Moreover, these identities are discussed, focusing on their keen role as the only son in the family and how it puts them in position where filial gratitude and elderly care were emphasized. So some of my respondents also discuss navigating these identities, both social and sexual, by taking recourse to homosociality and by prioritizing their marriage and domesticity. So my respondent in small towns of Odisha do not aspire to compulsorily come out and participate in a global queer discourse, rather consciously also dissociate themselves from the queer community, disengage from law, state, and state apparatus. So these are some of the ways in which they escape the regulatory forces and also the state's surveillance of people's sexuality. For them, their same-sex desire and behavior are intimately embedded in the natal kinship. Of course, these relationships are also conflictual in nature because of heteronormative expectations versus homoromantic desire and behavior. But also, there is a constant negotiation that takes place among these actors, specifically in the domestic space. Next slide, please. Okay, so other than that, I also examine how I also examine two broad issues here: heteronormative expectations of the family and same-sex intimacy of unmarried gay men in small towns of Odisha. So the heteronormative expectation that I discuss here majorly focus on marriage, reproduction, and elderly care. Further, the discussion also expands to how these men forge disparate forms of intimate and kinship practices with other men without verbally pronouncing their sexuality while engaging with the natal family. Yeah, so next slide, please. Thank you so much. Yeah. So finally, I ask, while gay men reconfigure the normative kinship, how do different stakeholders like wife, child, partner, and their families respond to it? So counterintuitively, these men discuss their marriage in the language or language like marital bliss or happy marriages. So referring to the to the notion, to the idea that romantic love is not a precondition of heterosexual marriage, rather a tolerable relationship is enough to survive the institution. So further, these discussions are also contextualized with a critical analysis of sociological literature on marriage in India in my research. So other than the centrality and universality of the marriage in India, what I particularly find important to the context of gay men's marriage to women is what uh, Pooler and Narasimhan uh, call endogamous companionate marriage. So what has changed over the last decades, so Fuller and Narasimhan argue, is the value that urban middle class families placed on the happiness of the married couple and make certain choices in order to maximize their future happiness and compatibility. So can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So these marriages of gay men with unsuspicious heterosexual women are seldom discussed as unhappy marriages, unhappy and loveless marriages. Counterintuitively, they articulate their relationship in a language of companionship, friendship, love, which may or may not mean romantic love. For example, during my multiple conversation with Rajesh, who is a self-identified gay man in his early 30s and has been married to a woman for the past 2 years, when I spoke to him in 2015, told me about his marriage in the following words: "It's good when you have somebody back home who loves you and stands by you whenever you need her. It feels good. She has been a very nice wife so far. She cares for me a lot and does everything for me. If you ask about sex, yes, it's good too. Other than that, I also have a kid back home whom I love the most." Yeah. So next slide, please. So, emphasizing on the compulsory heterosexual conjugality and indissolubility of the marriage with a woman, another respondent of mine, Das, who is a 32 years old gay man from Bhubaneswar, the capital city of Odisha, asserts that this is the only way to seek companionship for life and elderly care. Further, rationalizing his intermittent short-term sexual encounters with other men while remaining in the marriage with an unsuspicious, incomplicit wife, He says, when there are heterosexual people who go around with girls even after their marriage, why cannot a homosexual person do that? I'm a family man. I take very good care of my wife and child. I know how to keep them satisfied. So I have no problem leading a married life. He also argues that as long as a man takes care of the responsibilities as a provider and nurturer, he thinks he should be allowed to engage in same-sex activity. So most of the men neither discuss their marriage as loveless, or nor do they show any remorse of having married to a woman. The act of marrying a woman is never discussed as deceitful or marriage fraud as done by Jingsu Zhu in the urban Chinese context. Contrary to the dominant perception, they conceptualize their relationship with women as cordial based on interdependence. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So in this section of this talk, following Queer Opacity by Nicholas Davila, I show how gay men married to women situate themselves in position of ambivalence and reconfigure kinship structure by forcing partnership with other men while still remaining in the marriage with women. So when I met Satish, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So when I met Satish, a self-identified gay man in his late 40s, in 2015, he was already out to his wife, and he was in partnership with a man for the past 4 years. So Satish, on the one hand, has verbally pronounced his sexuality to his wife and inhabit the same domestic space with his partner for a considerable duration, but on the other hand, still manages to camouflage his same-sex identity from his family. So this is not to argue that such a navigation between polarized roles of gay man between family and same-sex intimacy is easy. Instead, to point out to the excess of such a possibility. So responding to the question of how his wife is dealing with the conjugal reconfiguration and how she's involved in the entire process, so he gives me a very long response. As you can see in the slide, what is particularly relevant here is how he says she is very involved in the process and wants the best for everybody, working towards it. So the wife in this case is involved in the process of kinship reconfiguration, not by dissolving the normative conjugality, but remaining in one. Her choice of staying in marriage and deciding not to nullify it also points out to her act of volition. Such simultaneity of working normative conjugality and letting the husband forge a new same-sex relationship suggests that her experiences run contrary to the victim-perpetrator discourse, where the wife is showcased as the victim of marriage fraud that Jingsu Zhu discusses in the urban Chinese context. Next slide, please. Taking this ethnographic snapshot as a point of departure, I want to discuss how Satish situates himself and his relationship in an opaque position as a queer tactic. So queer opacity as an optical spectrum that covers the ambiguous in-betweenness. It displaces the binaries of gay, straight, closet coming out, shame, proud, visible, invisible, and fake truth, and offers a different parameter from authenticity or visibility for us to understand various forms of camouflage, be it cooperative marriage, mixed orientation marriage, or fluorescent marriage, the ethicality of which should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Using queerness or queer kinship in the ever-inclusive sense, Jingsu Zhu also writes, if queerness signifies an open mesh of possibilities, gaps, overlaps, dissonances, and resonances, lapses and excesses of meaning, drawing from Sedgwick, then queer kinship should also include all forms of combination of gender, species, number of family members, or ways of procreation and parenting that put the concept of kinship into question. Yeah, next slide, please. The sanitized version of the story that Satish told me has little credibility, as it tactically erases the narrative of the wife. A feminist query is necessary here to what extent the courage to divorce and embrace kinship reconfiguration is gendered. I also acknowledge that this should be a caveat for researcher to remain alert to the gender while discussing mixed orientation marriage. Though this research does not intend to glorify these marriages as painless, instead want to point out how, just like many other marriages, a sustaining mixed orientation marriage can be attributed to many practical considerations that do not always center around sexual attraction and the disclosure thereof. So the availability of such a choice enables some gay men to reconfigure kinship structure, which this research suggests should instead be analyzed through a more cultural and critical lens. Next slide, please. Yeah. So further, I also demonstrate how two gay men married to women forge intimate relationship by cohabiting, by performing partnership through a quotidian living, and also how this form of a partnership is also legitimized by mutual care, love, affection, and interdependence in the absence of a legal sanctioning and to some extent social legitimization. For this purpose, I offer you an ethnographic account of Badal and Sanjeev. So two self-identified gay men in their early 40s who are married to women. These two men not only cohabit in the semi-urban locations of Bhubaneswar, but also have built a same-sex intimate relationship primarily based on friendship. So when I met Badal again during Dashera vacation, which is winter vacation on the occasion of the festival of Dashera in October 2019, after a lot of hesitation, I asked him how he defines his relationship with Sanjeev, whom he calls Sangha, which is an Odia term for friend. At this point, Badal became a little thoughtful and tried to respond to my question in the following term. You know, brother, we have actually been through a lot during these years of our friendship, but our family has majorly been very supportive. Sometimes people here at work ask us, how are you so involved with each other? We mostly tell them these are intimate friendship many wishes for, but a few can only have. So he never discussed a sort of precondition of social approval, legal sanctions, or ritualistic permission of their intimacy for one another. Even though such a relationship is far from being flawless, both of them have probably demonstrated a possibility of coexistence of marriage, family, reproduction, and also at the same time, a same-sex intimate relationship. Though such a kinship reconfiguration is neither discussed in the activist discourse, nor does it find adequate space in the academic literature in kinship study, it still holds a possibility as a way of loving and living in small towns of Odisha. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in conclusion, in order to understand the kinship reconfiguration and same-sex intimacies of gay men married to women in a more semi-urban South Asian context, we need to unpack how their experiences are intricately embedded in the centrality and universality of marriage, family, and intergenerational contracts. Such conversation not only requires more locally and culturally contextualized, nuanced framework, which is inclusive and which also decenters our transnational global queer templates. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Wonderful. Let me call on folks to send me a chat message, and if you have any questions, any comments for Jayaprakash, then we would love to hear those. Let me pose one initial question, maybe a couple. So I think for a number of us coming from North American or European experience, we would start to ask the obvious question, to what extent does the language, the identification, actually revolve around differences between gay men and bisexual men. To what extent are some of these individuals, your characters, your subjects, expressing a bisexual identity? Or do they explicitly identify as gay men? To what extent does the language, does the community express a difference between gay and bisexual? Obviously, the nuances of the colors of the community in the United Kingdom and North America have started to identify many different letters in the acronym. To what extent do you find that?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this question. I love it. Let me try to respond to this question this way. I have a chapter on identity where I particularly discuss how these men do not discuss desire behavior as constitutive of an identity. So basically, they might desire other men, they might get sexually involved, which is activity with other men, but they do not necessarily consider this desire and behavior as markers of their selfhood. So and it's been discussed by many other people in the so Paul Boyce discusses about it. Lawrence Cohen has done written about it. So desire and behavior not necessarily forming a discrete identity. But other than that, I also found that particularly people do not consider, for example, the my respondents and my protagonists of the research also come from a very particular population. I mean, they are educated people who are who have access to certain cultural and capital so the cultural capital, but and also because they are educated and they are mostly in their early 30s and early and late 30s, but so they're also aware of they're also aware of global queer discourses like LGBTQ, queer, gay, and other discourses. So there is a familiarity of these discourses. Hence, internet and multimedia has been their rite of passage to these identities. But having said that, and also very interestingly, some of my respondents, even though they do not necessarily call themselves either gay or queer man, their conversation sort of also focused on it's more like I am what I perform. Like they have discussed how some of them have called themselves top and others as the others have discussed that as bottom and versatile. So they're also because they have access to this cultural and social cultural and economic capital, social capital. So they are not entirely uninformed about the global queer discourse, but at the same time some of them also do not necessarily call themselves Kothi, Panthi, and other sort of indigenous, so-called indigenous category they which have been in which the identity of same-sex identified men have been discussed in the earlier literature. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, let me call first one, Pancho Malungani.
Oh, thank you so much. This is an amazing piece of research, and I just wanted to ask, in terms of the HIV.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. I think I lost you.
No, I think everybody lost Pancho's sound.
I think you need to unmute yourself. I'll type. Okay.
Oh, okay, we'll see if we get Pancho back later on. Or actually, if Pancho, if you want to type your question, then I can read it out, or Jayaprakash can read it out. So let us turn to Kate Harris.
Jayaprakash, thank you. That was really, really interesting. Just before I ask my question, it just reminds me of quite a few of the gay men I know have relationships with married men in the US and the UK I'm talking about here. So I realize it's a completely different family and culture in terms of social structures, but it just struck me as interesting that, you know, some of my friends actually say the vast majority of their partners are married to women, but that's just a kind of point that struck me. My question is, we've got a new LGBT Alliance group in India, just started quite recently. Mainly lesbians at the moment, but we're hoping that some gay men and bisexuals will join. One of the issues that's coming up for them is that because there's no law to allow gay marriage, they've told us about situations where lesbians are transitioning, physically transitioning to trans men so that they can live with their female partners, although they'd prefer to just be in a lesbian marriage, a gay marriage. Are you seeing any gay men who are becoming trans women because they can't have gay marriage?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. This is so insightful. In my research, no, I did not come across any any of my respondents or people that I know of, or my respondent know of. None of them sort of transition to marry another man, but there is a definitely a lot of discussions which is going on around same-sex marriage right now. Uh, uh, this is the sort of hot topic right now, and we are all very recently the state at the center, the political party which is now in the center, also uh, uh, told the apex court, the high court, that they are against it. So and we are not yet, like, they are like, we are not yet ready for it, and the usual sort of a narrative. Yeah, but thank you so much for this. It's very insightful. I'll look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's take Alex Sohato.
Alex, I think you need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Here we go. So I was just saying, thanks so much for sharing your study with us. So as part of my job, I've actually been traveling to India probably since 2005, and I've had the chance to see how things have changed, because I'm in the technology space. My previous job was working with Wipro, and I was there in 2017, 18, and 19, through the change of the law. And we had a very large Gen X and millennial population, and I think what I saw was that the Gen X folks were still reserved in their acceptance of the idea of just broader LGBT communities, but the millennials seem to be very open to it, right? So one of the things when you start to talk about the different age groups, what I'm curious about is whether there's any financial issues that some of these age groups are concerned about, right? And so I know that there's a tradition of dowry, for example, and does that play a role in how some of these folks view or some of these other considerations?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Brilliant question. Yes, so the intersectionality sort of analytic is very important, particularly when it comes to India, because we are a very diverse sort of, population, class, caste, of course, gender, and sexuality, everything. In my research, like I spoke earlier, I'm particularly looking at semi-urban locations, and also because I was particularly asking this question of marriage, family, and intimacy, I was mostly looking at people who are married to women, but at the same time of marriageable age, which is like post 25, like people who are uh, older than 25, and then 30 kind of sample. um, but you're right. These people that I have spoken to also come from a very specific time. I also discussed this in one of my sections of one of my chapter of my thesis, uh, like how these population that I discuss in my thesis are also the very first set of people who were introduced to internet, through chat rooms and websites. In fact, when I did my field research in 2015, apps were not really popular. Like when I go back to field sites now, like I'm currently based in Odisha, India. I finished my PhD in November 2020. I also realized that much have changed. And so when I did my field study with this particular kind of population, uh, my research is also very, very specifics. Like, it cannot also be generalized to certain other people. But I also see a different kind of a, you know, experience, and the queer experiences have also shifted with the with the people. I mean, next generation people uh, who are uh, who I think are also dealing with a very different kind of dilemma. For example, Maria Tonini, she discusses in the North Indian, she primarily works with sort of upper class young queer men in Delhi, where she also discusses how there are two different things, two different kind of uh, issues they deal with. One is, on the one hand, they also look for a specific identity, like want to come out and also look for a partner, and a specific queer identity, very distinct queer identity. But at the same time, their relationship with the family hasn't changed much. So the relationship between queer and kinship there is like very, very sort of can be discussed. It's very complex, and also it can be discussed in this theoretical framework of agonistic intimacy. Like, queer and kinship is not, I mean, family is not always antagonistic, or can be a mutual space for care and violence. So with these idea, I think, going back to your question, um, the dilemma that my population sort of deal with, or the issues they negotiate with, are slightly different from the issues that upper class, city bred young queer people are dealing with. And also going back to economic sort of variable of it, economic, I think most of my respondents, and yes, most of my respondents are educated, working educated people who have jobs, and also pretty well off. But at the same time, it definitely it so on the one hand, economy, if you're well off, if you have access to economic capital, it can put you in a better position financially. But at the same time, counterintuitively, it doesn't change much with the family. For example, I'm keep going to the family and kinship because it's very important. For example, some of my respondents who are, so in one particular example where one of my respondents, 30 years old, uh, works in tech. And so in my conversation with this person, he tells me that on the one hand, I sometimes feel that I want to just abdicate everything and go out, because there are opportunities to also move abroad and settle down there. But also on the other hand, I also feel that I'm very, very emotionally dependent on my family. And he particularly discusses that, isn't it a better idea to create a space, create a room of your own. So basically, it's very complex. Economic, and financial security doesn't necessarily change your dynamic with the family, but at the same time can also contribute, at the same time can contribute to well-being. Yeah, yes. I just hope I made sense. Yeah.
No, that's great. Before I call Ramakrishna, let me just pose briefly Panchamolagani's question, which revolved around this question about what is the propensity for HIV? What are the prevention strategies within this community as distinct from maybe more urban gay same-sex loving communities in India? Is there any difference?
Yeah, so I think this is a brilliant questions, but I don't think I should be responding to the, I think I'm unable to respond to those questions, because these are some of the research I have not looked into in my scholarship. But at the same time, what I have read and what I know, I particularly know that National AIDS Control, this NACO, and in Odisha, OSAX, these are organizations which particularly look at MSM, like men who have sex with men, and also trans man. So these are like target groups. They look at, and then there are outreach programs which are created around these populations. In my research, my ethnographic protagonists are where neither there was no intervention, there was no even if they were aware of they are like familiar and they're aware of HIV AIDS, because they are also educated, who have access to certain information, but uh, sort of institutionalized form of intervention was absent. None of them were sort of targeted or reached out by organizations. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, let us take Ramakrishna.
First of all, and thank you very much for the opportunity to ask the question, and fascinating session. I'm a medical doctor, and I think the medical question has been asked. What was fascinating to me, and the question I'd like to ask is, now you spoke about binaries, and you spoke about how these men navigate their relationship with their wives on one hand, and male partners or homosexual relationships on the other hand. Did you find any differences in self-justification or a sense of comfort with oneself when a man, homosexual or bisexual, had a wife and either had a committed male partner as opposed to perhaps multiple sexual partners without
Right.
a sense of commitment or partnership? Would be
Right.
interested in hearing your experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is brilliant. Yeah. So, so in my research, I came across, and I have spent time with over these years with men who look for, some of them who look for flings, short-term sexual encounters, and multiple engage with multiple partners sexually. But at the same time, in my ethnographic narratives, because I was specifically also looking for intimacy, I was looking at intimacy. Uh, I also found that some of the men who are married to women who have later gone on to forge intimate, romantic, long-term relationship with other men, and the process of negotiation is very interesting, because they did not just sort of were romantically involved. Rather, they were also, later went on to cohabit with some of them, like cohabit with their partner. For example, one very quickly, one ethnographic protagonist that I want to talk about is a 42 years man from the semi-urban locations close to Bhubaneswar, the capital city, where this man, when I interviewed him, when I met him in 2015, he was already out to his wife, and he was already in love with someone. But later on, because I have followed his life trajectory for the past 5 years, now the same sex relationship has become the primary one, and the mixed orientation marriage or heterosexual conjugality has become the secondary one. So and it's a very continuous sort of negotiation, where because the partner was also based somewhere else outside India, so there was so there was also attempt being made on his side to locate to the other place, go there, live there for 6 months, and then come back because of the visa issue. But I have also realized over these years that there is a possibility of existence that they have created together, and it is a very ongoing negotiation. It's not easy, but at the same time, what I'm trying to also demonstrate in my thesis is that this is what a lot of people are dealing with. This is how a lot of people are negotiating with. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Jaya, for sharing your work with us, which is terrific and really important. And we appreciate everybody being here with us today. Just to remind you, we're out of time now, but next week, Jamie Hagan from Queen's University in Belfast is going to be talking to us about international relations and queer spaces. And please check out our website, queerpolitics.org, for the remaining panels for the rest of the spring session, which I think are very exciting. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Keep well, keep safe, and we will reconvene next Thursday under the chairship of Gabrielle Magni. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, I look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.